My mother died when I was 10 days old. My father was a school teacher in Smithfield, Virginia, and I went from there to living with some of my aunts on both sides of the family. During her last moments on earth, she had instructed her family to take care of her boy and help him as much as possible, and they tried to do that. And my father exercised his parental prerogatives, and we took off various places in Virginia. I don't know how many elementary schools I went to. I do know that they were all, for the most part, in Virginia until World War II began. And we then went to Washington, D.C., where he took work at the Defense Department at the Pentagon. And we left there after a year or so. We didn't stay anywhere very long. There wasn't anything, we didn't have anything to carry with us that we couldn't carry in a suitcase. So we stayed in D.C. for 3 or 4 years. And then he went to Baltimore, where he became a teacher at Morgan State College in Baltimore. And lo and behold, after a year or so in Morgan, he got a telephone call from somebody in Orangeburg. And the call was that there was a job that he could, if he was interested in, that he could come down and take. And he accepted the job, and after 2 or 3 days, that's all long it takes to throw your few little rags together, and we went to Orangeburg. Well, in the meantime, I had shared with my friends in my age group who were just kids, and they explained to me that I was coming to South Carolina. South Carolina had recently had a terrific incident where a young man who was African American had lost his life, and they'd explained to me that I was going to get myself cut up and done up in South Carolina. Well, lo and behold, we came to South Carolina. I will never forget the trip down here, because the PD River was in its season of overflow, about like it is this month in the state. And I was shocked out of my gourd that I was coming into this place that I thought was the boondocks of South Carolina. Well, I arrived here, we got off the train. The man in Florence announced that Florence changed for Orangeburg. Well, of course, the PD was over its banks, and I really became upset about where was I headed. But anyway, we got here. Found ourselves in a town that was not anything like had been described to me and my young friends, but was a place of civilized people, people who loved each other and who respected each other and who were perfectly ready to help me on my mission. There was no difference in my life. Everywhere, particularly in the South, there was a rigid segregation. You went to movies, you went to a different place in movies, there was no place to eat, there was no place for, it was just segregated, much like Washington. Not that much different between Washington and South Carolina, except for the fact that the success rate of the blacks who were striving in Washington was a little different. We had lawyers in Washington and various and sundry other people of leadership capacities. While I was in Washington and Baltimore, there were people in those communities who had succeeded in the law and who were examples or role models for the younger people coming on. And one of those gentlemen was a man by the name of Belford V. Lawson, who was the president of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity, who was a dap dresser, a man who was in the leadership of his community, and a man who was articulate. And I sort of emulated the stories I had read about him in the Washington papers. And I decided I wanted to be a lawyer. Now, it didn't make any difference to me where I was going to be a lawyer. You have to understand that there were limited aspects that were open to you. And whatever you did, you had to do in a manner that you could make some achievement for your life. I went to college at Claflin. While we were in Baltimore, I think, my father got an offer of a job at Claflin. We hadn't heard anything about Claflin, didn't know anything about Claflin, but it was a magnificent move in the hands of some power greater than we didn't know. He stayed there for about 6 years. I went to college, began college at Claflin, and finished college at Claflin. At that time, the state of South Carolina did not have a law school which black citizens could attend. That was the years when the state would pay black citizens to go to whatever school they wanted to go to that would admit them. And I went to law school at South Carolina State. It stayed there for 3 years, and it was a good experience, good education, great collegiality among the 8 or 10 students they had, and a wonderful faculty. They provided us with the kind of background we would need to practice law in this different situation and under difficult circumstances. One of the things I feel shortchanged about is that after that program, the state of South Carolina made a decision that it would abolish its law school because they said they couldn't afford it. And it was providing opportunities where there was no true student body. We never had over 8, 10 students at that law school. The University of South Carolina probably had 20,000 books in its law school. The South Carolina State provided probably 1,500, but they had good teachers, good fellowship, and we had an adequate education for those days. When I became a lawyer in 1954, black lawyers, there were probably 5 in the state of South Carolina. There are probably 50 in the state now. And no, 50 in Columbia now. But it was different. It was trying times. There were difficult. For example, when I began the practice of law, I would take clients of mine who were African Americans, and I'd carry them to the courthouse so that they could see that a black lawyer could go into the courthouse and look at the books and pull out the books and read the books. And it was an educational process. My daddy was a strong-willed man, and he thought he did as well as he could under difficult circumstances, and that education was the atmosphere, and the education was the area that was open for black citizens to participate in a segregated society. But that was the where you could go and achieve and get a good job. My daddy was a teacher. That was a natural inclination. It was a job that if you got into teaching, you could draw a paycheck and feed a family and provide yourself with a reasonably decent living. I got married somewhere along the line. I don't remember when. When was it?
I wanted to ask about that. When did you meet Miss Finney?
Oh, she was a student at Claflin, a freshman. South Carolina State was right next to Claflin. There was just a fence between them, that's all. I don't remember the exact first time I met her, but I remember the first time I saw her. And she had a friend who had indicated to her that apparently I had had some conversation with her friend, and her friend was impressed with me more than she was, and that perhaps she'd like to meet me. And she had arranged for us to meet at Claflin's canteen. That was the place, a social center of Claflin, right adjacent to South Carolina State. And that's how I met her. Her friend introduced me to her. We had this, finally made arrangements to take her to the movies. She came bobbling down the dormitory steps and had on bobby socks, which was the attire for freshman students to wear, because they had to have some identifying mark. They had to have on green shirts and bobby socks. And when we got to almost to the movie, or maybe walking off the campus, she had said words to me, and I said, "Where are you going with socks on?" "I'm a law student. I'm a lawyer. I'm going to be a lawyer." Because by then I was a senior in law school. And I explained to her that it would be inappropriate for me to be seen in the street with some girl with bobby socks, which indicates she's a freshman at Claflin. But anyway, we resolved that dilemma. She didn't leave me.
I think that people understand now how difficult it was then.
I think they have some appreciation. I do not think they understand all of the nuances and the difficulties with which you were confronted. I think if they knew the story, then they would have a deeper appreciation of what the road we trod. Among the people who were instrumental in my book entering the law career was Matthew James Perry, who was a lawyer from Spartanburg, South Carolina, who was chief counsel for the NAACP. And I was not happy, or content, I guess would be a better word, with my progress as a lawyer in Conway, for the simple reason that, number one, the people didn't think of me as a lawyer. They thought of me as a school teacher because I taught. And Matthew came to our house in Sumter a couple of years down the road and said, "Come to Sumter," because Sumter was the head of the Citizens Council. It had a strong NAACP chapter. It had a bunch of leaders who were active in the NAACP and in the movement. And it was about this time that the movement was beginning hit where it started. And he said, "You ought to come to Sumter." And of course, I didn't have but, one child? Maybe two. And in Sumter, when I landed in Sumter, one of the people that I met was a man by the name of Dr. O.R. Rubin. He was president of Morris College. Dr. Rubin said, "Look, you need to have some employment because you weren't making any money. People didn't know about you." There had been one black lawyer in Sumter before me, And he said, why don't you teach class? Back in my time, that's what you did. You did teach a little bit and you practiced a little law. But Sumter provided me with a monthly check. And you cannot believe the significance and importance of that monthly check. It wasn't much, but guess what? It was enough to help you buy groceries, buy gas. And I taught at Morris College for about 3 years, one class a week. And that's all I wanted. Just have something that I can keep my creditors off my back. All I wanted to do was make a living to be able to support my family and to provide an opportunity for me to be a lawyer. Early in my career in Sumter, Sumter was a progressive community, had active black leadership, and I decided I wanted to run for the legislature. And I ran 3 times and got my little hips whipped 3 times, but never did it discourage me from my ambition to be a member of the legislature of South Carolina. Don't ask me why. As I look back on it, it must have been some wild dream. But I ran 3 times, I lost 3 times, but I lost respectably. I had good support. My constituency in my community was good. And of course, remember, I had told you that Sumter had had active political leadership in the NAACP. And they stayed with me. In Sumter was the headquarters of the White Citizens Council. And in those communities where the whites were organized and active in doing things, that meant that they were stronger, they were standing up taller and stronger and were involved. And it made the black community more cohesive and willing to fight. Morris College had an active NAACP chapter that was very active in the sit-ins and in the demonstrations throughout the Sumter County. And that provided me some exposure, and it provided a group of people who I could look to and work with. I represented in my career as a lawyer in Sumter probably 4,500 students. Won every one of them, not at trial, but won every one of those cases on appeal. Lost every one of them at trial. But it was good for me and it was good for the spirit, and I had people who I could count on that would depend on me and would rely upon my legal advice. And it got me some exposure. Yeah, I won after 3 times, getting my butt cut to a fairly well. I won and got to the legislature. First thing that happened to me in the legislature was the fact that for some reason, God only knows why, I got appointed to the South Carolina House Judiciary Committee. I was the first African American to ever serve on that committee. And that was good seasoning for me, good exposure. I had everything going for me there. And after serving on that committee for a while, I became chairman of the South Carolina Legislative Black Caucus, and I became sort of indicated, the people sort of supported me. Then after 3 or 5 years, somewhere like that, the legislature, might have been 7, I don't know. There was a vacancy coming out on the South Carolina Supreme Court. And what if there's a vacancy? Finney's a horse, you know, you got to run. So the people supported me. I won. I won against a sitting legislator. and I got the job as Chief Justice. No, I got a job as a justice on the Supreme Court.
Now, being the first black Supreme Court justice in South Carolina, there had to be a lot of negativity placed on you at that time, was there?
Amazingly, I didn't feel any. There might have been that, but I was of that age which you didn't think about those kind of things. All you thought about was the fact of an opportunity to serve the people who wanted you. The black folks were supporting you. The white folks were not adamantly against you. And so you could do it.
What was the victory like, not only for you, but for the black community? Did you feel that at the time? Is that something that you can reflect on and see it clearer now? Or was that felt even at that time?
I think it was felt at that time because South Carolina had its history of negativism in the race relations agenda. But we had been fortunate, even during the demonstrations and during the sit-ins. South Carolina, except for the Orangeburg massacre, had only one incident of clear racial violence directly attributable to the integration movement. Other states had bloodshed and more difficult times physically. I hope that my ability to serve for 10 years as a Chief Justice of the court opened up opportunities for other young black females and males to exercise legal opinions and become part of the judicial system without any marks. Work with the system, work to change the system, work to improve your opportunities, and be prepared because opportunities are. When I went to practice law in Sumter, I told you there was one other individual who was a black citizen who practiced law, but he also preached, which was the way black lawyers and blacks in difficult positions, they had something else. They were preachers, teachers, various and sundry other professions, but they had a means of feeding their family and providing themselves with a way of living. And in addition, practice law. That was the story of most of them. I'd say 99 and 44, 100% of those few who were lawyers had other employment opportunities.
What do you want to be known about your legacy? What would you like to, 100 years from now when children study the history, what would you like?
Number one, if they write it, and if they tell it like it is, I hope that it will provide an opportunity and motivation for the children who are coming along to grab every opportunity that this presents itself and to provide an opportunity for them to improve their lives and their friends' lives. The one thing that I feel we have missed the boat about in some of the civil rights demonstrations and things is that we missed so many kids. We missed so many kids who deserve and would have made additional progress and success. We just, somehow or another, we kept fighting so bad, so long, so hard, that we missed so many people we could have successfully grabbed. Many of the young people we see today walking the streets don't understand, number one, what the young people of my generation went through to achieve what we have. And they need to be fighting every opportunity they have to make the system work. But too often we've missed them. I would like to be remembered as a man who accepted every opportunity that presented itself to be a part of a solution to a problem and a dilemma, and provided an opportunity for so many children. There's so many opportunities now available. And that I've helped motivate and keep them on their goals. We've got to struggle and make progress together. South Carolina has made lots of progress. Not a perfect place yet, but they've made progress. And we've got to be appreciative of the progress we've made and be aware of the fact that we can go further and make this American dream a reality. That's what my goal is, to make the dream of American democracy a reality rather than not a dream.